You think Psalm 1 is comfort, but what if it's a mechanism? What if day and night isn't devotion at all, but a law that's been shaping your life while you slept? You were taught to read sacred words like poetry, slow, beautiful, harmless. But Psalm 1 doesn't soothe, it conditions. Somewhere along the way, your inner world learned a different rhythm. Worry rehearsed more often than truth, fear repeated until it felt factual. And the subconscious, obedient and silent, accepted every image as law. You kept laboring, praying, starting again, yet something invisible kept redirecting the harvest. Not because you lacked faith, but because something else was being meditated on day and night. The unsettling possibility is this: your life has been prospering perfectly, just not toward what you consciously desire. The psalm whispers of a tree, rooted and supplied, but it never says the soil decides the fruit. It says the law does. And the question hangs, unresolved: what law have you actually been imprinting when no one was watching? Here is where it gets uncomfortable, because this is not a gentle teaching. This is spiritual surgery, and surgery is never polite. Most people think their lack is the problem. They think the problem is money, timing, other people, bad luck, not enough resources, not enough education, not enough favor. But the hidden problem is more humiliating than all of that. The hidden problem is that you have been faithful in the wrong direction. That sentence is hard to swallow. It triggers resistance. It makes the mind argue. It makes the heart defensive. Because you remember your prayers. You remember your efforts. You remember your tears. You remember how desperate you were when you begged God for change. So you want a simpler explanation. You want a villain. You want a curse. You want an external reason. Because external reasons preserve your innocence. They preserve your comfort. They preserve the belief that you're powerless, which is painful, but familiar. But Psalm 1 does not talk to powerless people. It talks to imprinters. To those who are always imprinting something, whether they mean to or not. And that's where your frustration has been born. You have been taught that trying harder is spiritual maturity. You have been taught that more effort equals more blessing. You have been taught that if results don't come, you must be lacking faith. So when you didn't see results, you did what you were trained to do. You pushed. You pushed prayers through exhaustion. You pushed affirmations through doubt. You pushed positivity through grief. But you cannot outwork a subconscious rehearsal, because the subconscious does not respond to intensity, it responds to consistency. And the contradiction is brutal. You might have consciously prayed for peace, but unconsciously rehearsed disaster. You might have consciously asked for love, but unconsciously anticipated abandonment. You might have consciously desired abundance, but unconsciously repeated images of scarcity until they became your internal truth. That's not moral failure. That's not God punishing you. That's not the universe testing you. That's simply how imprinting works. Repetition carves pathways. Repetition builds expectation. Repetition becomes a lens that edits what you see, what you choose, what you tolerate, what you settle for. And here is the part that feels almost unbelievable. Your subconscious can override your conscious prayer the way an old reflex overrides a new intention. It will choose the known over the desired, the familiar over the promised, the practiced shadow over the unpracticed light. So you kept starting again. But you were starting again on top of the same inner script. New job, same dread, new relationship, same fear, new plan, same self-sabotage, new prayer, same inner movie. And then, this is the cruelest twist, you called it life. You called it reality. You called it just how things are. But it was not how things are. It was what you had rehearsed until it felt factual. The mind does this quietly. It does it at night. It does it in the shower. It does it in micro moments when no one is watching. It replays old regret like a sacred text. It replays humiliation like a prophecy. It replays fear like it's protecting you. And you don't notice because it sounds like your own voice. That is the hidden problem. Not that you didn't pray, but that your inner repetition outweighed your prayer. And when repetition outweighs prayer, the subconscious does what it always does. It makes the repeated thing feel like truth. Now comes the moment where the heart wants to look away. Because once you see this, you can't unsee it. You realize you were not being attacked by random chaos. You were being governed by an invisible agreement, and the agreement was signed with repetition. Every time you said, "I just know something will go wrong," even as a joke, the subconscious heard law. Every time you imagined the phone call delivering bad news, the subconscious heard instruction. Every time you replayed an old betrayal and felt the same heat rise again, the subconscious recorded it as your reality's blueprint. And the subconscious is not a philosopher. It is not a theologian. It is not a moral judge. It is a builder. It builds what is impressed. It multiplies what is rehearsed. It organizes your choices, your reactions, your timing, your perception around the dominant inner signal. So here is the painful recognition. You were not stuck because you didn't want freedom. You were stuck because your inner world kept practicing bondage with more consistency than it practiced liberation. You were not blocked because God refused you. You were blocked because you kept returning day and night to the same emotional frequency, the same mental imagery, the same shadow story, until it became your internal home. And the subconscious always brings you home, even when home hurts. That's why you can step into opportunity and immediately feel anxiety. That's why you can receive love and immediately search for the exit. That's why you can taste progress and then suddenly self-sabotage, as if an unseen hand pulls you back. It's not an unseen hand. It's an unseen habit, a habit of inner rehearsal. And the moment you realize this, the old comfort stories collapse. It wasn't bad timing. It wasn't people always fail you. It wasn't you're unlucky. It wasn't even you're not spiritual enough. It was a law operating without your conscious consent, because your subconscious consent was given through repetition. And that brings up a strange mixture of emotions. Frustration, because you feel betrayed by your own mind. Regret, because you see how many years were spent rehearsing what you feared. Desperation, because you realize the law is always on. And a quiet, dangerous spark of hope. Because if this mechanism is real, then it can be redirected. But don't rush to hope yet. Hope too early becomes denial. We're not using hope as a drug. We're using truth as a scalpel. Because there is one more unbearable layer. If repetition has been shaping your outcomes, then your life has been prospering towards something this entire time. Not toward what you consciously wanted, but toward what you consistently impressed. That means your current reality is not random. It is evidence. Evidence of what has been meditated day and night. And now the question becomes sharper than it was in the beginning. Not poetic, not religious, not gentle, sharp. When you were alone, when your face was calm, when you told everyone you were fine, what were you truly imprinting? What story did you return to? What ending did you rehearse? What disaster did you cradle like a secret? Because the law did not stop while you slept. The law did not pause while you suffered. The law did not care that you didn't mean it. It simply received. It simply multiplied, and it is receiving right now too. So before we even speak of solutions, before we unveil the mechanism fully, you have to sit with this unsettling, almost unbelievable possibility that your life has been obeying you, just not the part of you that speaks out loud. So which part of you has been speaking day and night? At some point, explanation stops being comforting and starts being dangerous, because once you glimpse the mechanism, you realize it was never personal. And that realization feels like betrayal. Not betrayal by God, not betrayal by fate, but betrayal by the story you were taught about how reality works. You were taught that thoughts are fleeting, that imagination is harmless, that what happens inside stays inside. But the subconscious does not live inside you. You live inside it. This is the part almost no one explains correctly. The subconscious is not a container. It is a field, a receptive field, a shaping field, a field that does not generate. It reflects, amplifies, and organizes. Think of it like a signal receiver that never turns off. Every emotional frequency you broadcast, every image you linger in, every inner scene you return to again and again, the field receives it. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, literally. And it does one thing with ruthless precision. It multiplies. This is why the language of Psalm 1 is so precise, almost cold in its clarity. It does not say, thinks about. It does not say, believes in. It says, meditates. Meditation is not effort, it is residence, where your attention lives long enough to leave fingerprints, day and night. That phrase is not devotional. It is neurological, energetic, existential. Because repetition during emotional vulnerability is how the field is imprinted. Night is when defenses are down. Night is when imagination becomes vivid. Night is when the mind stops pretending. Whatever you replay there, the argument you never won, the failure you never forgave, the future disaster you keep rehearsing just in case. That is not passive thought. That is instruction. The subconscious takes those instructions and reorganizes everything downstream. What opportunities you notice, what risks you instinctively avoid, what feels safe, what feels impossible, what you tolerate, what you sabotage. Not consciously, automatically, like a mirror that doesn't reflect your face, but your frequency. And here is where awe mixes with dread. The mirror never lies, but it also never explains itself. So when people say, I don't know why this keeps happening to me, they are telling the truth. They don't know. Because the imprinting happened quietly, incrementally, in moments that felt insignificant. A sigh, a thought, a memory revisited one too many times, and suddenly, years later, there is a pattern. This is why fear manifests faster than faith. Fear is practiced with detail. Fear is rehearsed with emotion. Fear is imagined with sensory clarity. Faith, on the other hand, is often abstract, vague, visited only in moments of crisis. The subconscious does not respond to belief statements. It responds to imagined reality. What you see inwardly as already true, it treats as true. This is the invisible law, not reward, not punishment, reflection. And that realization shatters a comforting illusion, that life is reacting to what happens to you. It isn't. It is responding to what is happening through you. And now, something inside you starts to feel exposed. Because if this is true, then the mind you trusted to protect you has been shaping your world in silence, not maliciously, not consciously, but faithfully. And faith without awareness is dangerous. Once you understand the mirror, you begin to see it everywhere. You see why people escape one situation only to recreate it somewhere else. Why different faces deliver the same wound. Why new beginnings wear old endings. Because the field does not respond to circumstance, it responds to state. You don't attract what you want. You don't even attract what you think. You attract what you inhabit. This is where old spiritual beliefs begin to feel insufficient, almost naive. You were taught to monitor your words, but not your imagery. You were taught to control behavior, but not emotional resonance. You were taught that morality was the gatekeeper, when in truth, frequency is. The subconscious doesn't speak language. It speaks picture. It speaks feeling. And whatever picture is repeated with emotional charge becomes the organizing principle of your life. That's why trauma is so powerful. It comes with intense emotion and vivid imagery. It imprints fast. But here is the revelation hidden in that terror. If trauma imprints because of intensity plus repetition, then creation works the same way. The same mechanism that enslaves can liberate. The same law that reflected your shadow can reflect your light. But, and this is critical, the law does not switch modes. It doesn't care whether the image is conscious or unconscious, chosen or inherited, holy or destructive. It reflects what is most practiced, and that's where the betrayal deepens. Because you realize the system was never unfair. It was never rigged. It never targeted you. It treated you exactly like everyone else. It gave you what you lived in, which means the most dangerous phrase you can say is, I can't help thinking this way. Because the field doesn't hear helplessness, it hears continuation. Even now, as you listen, the law is operating. Your body is responding. Your imagination is active. Your inner commentary is forming images. You are imprinting something right now. That's the part that creates existential vertigo. There is no pause button, no neutral state, no off position. You are either reinforcing the old signal or introducing a new one. But knowing this does not immediately free you. In fact, at first it makes things worse, because awareness creates responsibility. You can no longer blame randomness. You can no longer hide behind ignorance. And you start to notice how often the mind drifts back to the familiar shadow. Not because it's evil, because it's practiced. The subconscious loves what it knows, even if what it knows hurts. This is why change feels unsafe, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. So here you stand between two truths, the old inner world that feels real but keeps reproducing the same outcomes, and the unknown inner world that feels unreal because you haven't lived there yet, and the law is watching, not judging, not waiting, reflecting, multiplying. This is the moment where awe becomes fear, and fear becomes possibility. Because if the mirror reflects frequency, then the question is no longer, why did this happen to me? The question becomes unbearable in its simplicity. What have I been living in day and night? And even more unsettling, what am I living in now? If something in you shifted while listening, not excitement, not comfort, but that quiet, unsettling recognition, then pause here. Do not scroll. Do not minimize this moment, because moments like this are rare, and they pass quickly if they are not marked. You've just encountered a truth that does not beg for belief. It demands response, and response is not symbolic. Response is energetic. Right now, there are two loops available to you. One is familiar. It's the loop where insight feels powerful for a few minutes, then dissolves into the same old internal rhythm. The loop where recognition becomes entertainment, where truth is consumed, not embodied. That loop is comfortable because it requires nothing from you. No declaration, no interruption, no risk. The other loop is smaller, but sharper. It begins with a deliberate act. When you like this video, you are not rewarding content. You are interrupting inertia. You are telling your nervous system, this mattered enough to move my body. That physical motion, small as it seems, breaks passivity. It signals choice, and choice is the enemy of unconscious repetition. When you comment, something deeper happens. Language crystallizes intention. What stays vague in the mind becomes anchored when it is named. Write the law you are ready to imprint, not a goal, not a wish, a law. Something you are willing to return to day and night, even when emotion resists, even when habit pulls backward. Do not craft it for others. Craft it for the part of you that has been running the old program in silence. And when you subscribe, understand this clearly. This is not following a channel. It is a public marker. It is a line drawn between what you use to consume passively and what you are now choosing to engage consciously. The subconscious notices witnesses. It notices commitment made visible. That's why secrecy protects old patterns, and declaration destabilizes them. This is not about algorithms. It's about alignment. If this realization stirred something uncomfortable, if you felt exposed rather than soothed, if part of you wanted to resist while another part leaned in, that is the exact moment where old loops either tighten or break. Delay is not neutral. Delay reinforces the familiar, and the familiar, as you now know, is not always safe. It's just practiced. So do not promise yourself you'll come back later. Later is the subconscious's favorite hiding place. Act now, while the signal is alive, while the mirror is still reflecting awareness instead of habit. Like, comment, subscribe, not for me. For the part of you that is tired of living inside rehearsed shadow, because this interaction, this small visible interruption, is not the transformation, but it is the doorway. And once a doorway is crossed, the old loop can no longer pretend nothing happened. The shift does not announce itself with fireworks. It does not arrive with instructions. It does not feel victorious. It feels, quieter than that, almost disappointing at first, because after everything you've just seen, after the awe, the betrayal, the existential weight, you expect something dramatic, a ritual, a declaration, a list of actions that finally give you control. But the law you are facing does not respond to control. It responds to resonance, and resonance begins with one subtle, almost invisible pivot. Not effort, not force, not discipline, attention. Not the sharp, strained attention you were taught to admire, but a gentler, more dangerous kind, the kind that chooses where to live internally. This is where most people misunderstand the shift and abandon it before it ever begins. They assume change requires fighting the old pattern. They brace themselves for a war with thought, with memory, with emotion. But the subconscious does not surrender to conflict. It surrenders to replacement. You don't evict a pattern by arguing with it. You outgrow it by no longer living there. The pivot is this. You stop feeding the old inner theater with curiosity. Not hatred, not suppression, curiosity. You stop asking, why do I feel this way? In moments where that question only reopens the wound, you stop replaying the same scenes under the guise of processing. You stop revisiting the shadow just to see if it still hurts, because every revisit is a rehearsal, and every rehearsal is an imprint. Instead, slowly, deliberately, you begin to return to a different inner atmosphere, not to make something happen, not to force belief, but to inhabit. This is the part that feels almost too simple to trust. You choose one inner state, not a fantasy, not an escape, but a felt orientation, and you return to it again and again, not constantly, not perfectly, but faithfully. The subconscious does not require intensity. It requires familiarity. So you begin to notice moments, small ones, where the old pattern tries to pull you back. A pause before sleep, a quiet drive, a shower. That empty space where worry used to step in automatically, and instead of following it, you redirect. Not with words, with imagery. Because imagery is the native language of the subconscious. You let the body feel what it would feel like if the new law were already active. Not excitement, not ecstasy. Stability, groundedness, rootedness. You don't argue with doubt. You don't explain anything to yourself, you simply return. This return is the practice, day and night, not as devotion, as law. And here is where controlled relief begins to enter, quietly, because for the first time, you are no longer wrestling with your mind. You are choosing where to stand within it. There is relief in that. But it is not loud. It is the relief of no longer rehearsing disaster out of habit. The relief of noticing that you don't have to finish every anxious thought. The relief of realizing that you are allowed to leave the room internally. And still, hope remains suppressed. Because this is not about immediate results. The law you are working with is slow, faithful, inevitable, just like the old pattern was. This is where impatience tries to sabotage the shift. A voice will say, "Is this doing anything?" Another will whisper, "You're pretending." Another will urge, "Check the outside, look for proof." But the mirror does not respond to checking, it responds to dwelling. And dwelling requires restraint. Restraint from scanning reality for confirmation. Restraint from narrating progress. Restraint from turning the process into performance. Because the moment you use the new inner state to demand results, you leave it. You turn residence into transaction. And the subconscious does not transact, it absorbs, so the shift stays quiet, almost hidden. You begin to notice that certain thoughts no longer hook you as deeply. That old emotional spikes rise, but fall faster. That the inner movie loses detail, color, urgency. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped attending it. Attention is nourishment. Where attention goes, life grows, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the new inner orientation gains weight. It starts to feel less imagined and more familiar, less fragile, less forced. This is the most dangerous moment of all, because familiarity is what made the old pattern powerful, and now familiarity is changing sides. But do not mistake this for resolution. The law is still operating, the mirror is still reflecting, and the old state does not disappear politely. It waits, it tests, it returns during fatigue, stress, disappointment, not to punish you, but to see where you live now. And each time you return, without drama, without commentary, to the new inner ground, something irreversible happens. The subconscious updates, not with declarations, with evidence. Evidence that this new state is not a visitor, it is a residence. Still, nothing has manifested, nothing has been promised, nothing has been sealed, and that is exactly how it must be. Because this shift is not about getting something. It is about becoming unavailable to the old law, unavailable to constant worry, unavailable to rehearsed regret, unavailable to the shadow that once felt like protection. You are not healed, you are not finished, you are simply no longer living where you used to live. And that is enough to unsettle everything downstream. But the mirror does not rush. It watches, it waits. It reflects what you return to, again and again and again. At first, the change does not feel empowering. It feels destabilizing, because identity does not collapse politely. It resists. It bargains. It disguises itself as reason. You have lived for so long inside a particular inner posture that it began to feel like you. The one who worries just to be prepared. The one who stays guarded to avoid disappointment. The one who doubts quietly to stay realistic. That identity was never named, but it was rehearsed. And now, without fireworks, without drama, you are no longer fully inside it. This is where confusion enters. You don't feel like the old self, but you don't yet feel like anything new. There is a strange, hollow space where certainty used to be, a silence where the familiar inner commentary once lived, and silence is terrifying to an identity built on constant internal narration. The old self begins to whisper, "You're losing your edge, you're becoming passive, you're not being careful enough." But underneath those objections is fear, because the old identity survived by vigilance, by scanning, by anticipating loss before it arrived. That vigilance felt like intelligence. It felt like maturity. It felt like control. Letting go of it feels irresponsible, yet something deeper knows the truth. That vigilance was not wisdom. It was residence in a shadowed inner law. And now, as you no longer return there automatically, the identity that lived off that law begins to weaken. This is not ego death, it is ego displacement. You are no longer organized around defense. And without defense as a center, the question arises, who am I now? This is where power enters, not as confidence, but as orientation. You begin to sense yourself as someone who does not chase outcomes, someone who does not argue with inner weather, someone who does not need to rehearse catastrophe to feel prepared. You're not optimistic. You're not naive. You are rooted. Rooted people behave differently, not because they try to, but because their reactions no longer come from fear. They pause more. They speak less urgently. They tolerate uncertainty without filling it with noise, and this unsettles others, because a person who is no longer emotionally reactive is difficult to manipulate, rush, or intimidate. But the deeper disruption is internal. The old identity depended on struggle to feel meaningful, on effort to feel worthy, on constant inner activity to feel alive. Without that struggle, there is a temptation to feel empty. This is where many people panic and run back to the old pattern, not because it worked, but because it felt like home. You feel that pull. Moments arise where the old anxiety tries to reclaim you, offering familiarity in exchange for your attention. And you realize something crucial. The old self does not disappear because you understand it. It disappears only when it is no longer inhabited, so you do not attack it. You do not shame it. You simply stop living there. This is the new identity forming, not as a statement, but as a stance. You begin to experience yourself as a cultivator rather than a victim. A cultivator does not beg the soil. A cultivator does not panic at weather. A cultivator understands timing without obsessing over it. Cultivators know that growth is invisible before it is undeniable, and this reframes how you see yourself in the world. You no longer introduce yourself internally as someone who struggles with, or someone who always has bad luck, or someone who is trying to overcome. Those labels were imprints. Now something quieter replaces them. Someone who chooses inner law consciously. This does not make you superior. It makes you sober. You stop romanticizing pain. Stop turning suffering into identity. Stop using the past as a credential. And this is where liberation carries heat. Because if you are no longer your wounds, you are no longer protected by them either. No more excuses, no more tragic narrative to hide behind, no more comfort in being the one who always That loss stings. But what replaces it is not ego inflation. It is agency. Not control over life, but authorship of inner law. You realize you don't need to wait for circumstances to change before you feel aligned. Alignment is not a reward, it is a residence. This identity does not seek validation. It does not broadcast transformation. It does not rush to explain itself. It simply returns again and again to the inner ground it has chosen. And because the subconscious organizes reality around identity, something subtle begins to happen. Your reactions no longer reinforce the old signal. Your choices stop feeding the old loop. Your boundaries emerge without aggression. But do not confuse this with completion. The old identity still exists. It waits in fatigue. It waits in disappointment. It waits in moments of rejection. It will test whether this new stance is temporary or inhabited, and that test is not gentle, because identity is the deepest imprint of all. Yet even now, the shift is incomplete. You are becoming someone else. But the mirror has not finished reflecting, and that leaves you suspended in a charged space between who you were trained to be and who you are quietly becoming. No labels, no declarations, only a lived difference, and the law is still watching. There is no ending here, only a field you are now aware of. That awareness changes nothing immediately, and that is what makes it powerful. Because the law you've encountered does not respond to urgency. It responds to continuation. Right now, as this moment stretches, something subtle is happening. Your body is breathing. Your mind is forming images. Your attention is drifting towards something, or away from something else. The law is receiving all of it. Not tomorrow, not after you decide. Now. This is the unsettling part most people try to escape. There is no neutral ground. You are always impressing, always repeating, always feeding the mirror. Even silence carries frequency, even hesitation has texture. And so the question does not close, it follows. It follows you into the next hour when nothing dramatic happens and the old habits quietly ask to return. It follows you into the night, when the mind loosens its grip and familiar images line up at the door. It follows you into ordinary moments, washing your hands, waiting in traffic, staring at a ceiling. Those moments were never empty. They were always the altar. What you return to there is what becomes structure, not because you believe it, but because you live it. This is why the law feels almost cruel in its honesty. It does not rescue, it does not intervene. It does not interrupt your patterns for you. It reflects them. And reflection is merciless, but fair. The shadow you practiced did not arrive as punishment. The stability you are beginning to taste will not arrive as reward. Both arrive as echo. This is where mystery deepens rather than resolves. Because you realize something that does not feel comforting at all. Even now you could drift back. Even now you could choose the familiar inner tension, the rehearsed worry, the old identity that knows how to survive pain. Nothing stops you. The law will follow that choice too. That is the freedom no one talks about, the freedom that does not feel kind. And yet within that stark freedom something luminous flickers. Not hope, not certainty, possibility. Because for the first time, you are not asking why life is happening to you. You are noticing how you are meeting it internally, and that noticing is not passive. It sharpens, it hums, it makes you aware of every return, every drift, every silent repetition. The mirror is closer now, clearer. You may feel exposed by that, or strangely awake. Both are appropriate. There is no promise here of ease, no assurance of immediate change, no guarantee that the old shadows won't knock louder before they fade. But there is one truth that lingers, unresolved and undeniable. The law has been active this entire time. It did not start when you understood it. It will not stop when this ends. It is shaping, organizing, reflecting. And it will continue to do so tonight, and tomorrow, and in every quiet moment where attention goes unnoticed. So the question does not conclude with an answer. It settles into you instead. What are you returning to when no one is watching? What image do you dwell in when effort relaxes? What inner ground feels like home now? There is no music cue here, no final sentence to resolve the tension. only the awareness that whatever you repeat next is already becoming form.